Potential. Welcome to Level 4 of RPG Potential. I'm Kody, and in this episode, I'm talking with Bobby Schroeder. Bobby created Super Lesbian Animal RPG, also known as SLARPG, an RPG about love, anxiety, and fighting funny-looking monsters in dungeons. That's out now for Windows computers on Steam and itch.io. I'd like to apologize in advance for my lower quality microphone you'll hear in this episode too. Sorry about that. Anyways, let's get right into it. Thanks for talking with me, Bobby. What are some of your favorite RPGs and why?
All right, well, stop me if you've heard this one before, but I like this little series called Mother.
Yeah, I get that a lot.
I bet. I have liked Mother since I was a teenager. I was one of many people who saw Ness and Smash Brothers and was like, "Oh, what's that game?" And then eventually, I managed to pick up a used copy at a local game store for only like
Me
$60 of
too.
Earthbound, which was
A simpler time.
yeah, that was at the time I thought that was a lot for a Super
Yeah.
Nintendo game. I just really fell in love with the whole world and how it felt like there was always something fun to find around every corner and how unique it was compared to other RPGs I've played. Yeah, and of course, I also have to shout out Mother 3, of course. I haven't played Mother 1 as much, but Mother 3 is definitely one of my all-time faves.
Yeah, I've heard that a lot too.
Yeah, I don't know. I need to go back to it one of these days. It's just
It's tough to get through.
yeah, I don't have as much experience with NES RPGs compared to later ones. Definitely Final Fantasy. Final Fantasy 1 actually, the Game Boy Advance version, that was a big one for me growing up.
Oh, cool.
That was like the platonic ideal of a JRPG for me. 5 and 6 and 7 are probably my favorites. Otherwise though, I really love the job system in 5 and the whole story in 6 and 7. More recently, I definitely Dragon Quest 11. That was the first Dragon Quest I really invested a lot of time with actually, and I just really made me fall in love with that series. So now I have to go play all the rest.
Yeah, that's great. Moving on to some of your own work. When did you come up with your first idea for Super Lesbian Horse RPG? And what was that version of the idea like at the beginning?
So we get to talk about my dark past. that that I don't we don't there we'll get to the reasons why this doesn't come up as much
Yeah.
these days, but so I knew I wanted to make games since like middle school. I I got into like sprite comics and sprite editing, and so naturally from there I was like, well, what if I made a game out of these? But I was always like, well, I gotta go to college and get a game design degree to learn how to make video games. So that was always just something I put off. But there was there was this period of my life that was kind of rough. In my freshman year of college, I was going to community college, and I needed some kind of creative project to distract myself. And I stumbled upon this game. I don't know if you've heard of this Mega Man Sprite game by Splendid Land.
I think I have, yeah.
Yeah. So this was like it was based on Mega Man Sprite comic, which was a crude parody of old Mega Man Sprite comics by Splendid Land. And
Yeah.
it's just this very bizarre little, like intentionally janky, like crude graphics,
Yeah.
jokey Mega Man game, only like as loosely as possible based on Mega Man. And Splendid Land more recently did like Franken, and
Oh yeah, Franken too, yeah.
yeah, she contributed to Deltarune, I think. She did like some anime designs. So I saw this and I was like, I could make something like this. This is doable for me. Something with like a bunch of just repurposed music and like crude and just like a long series of jokes. And I could like throw something like this together on RPG Maker. What I did was I have to admit I did pirate a copy of RPG Maker VX Ace. I got a paid copy later, but I was like broke at the time, so I just pirated it and I looked up tutorials.
Understandable.
I looked up tutorials on YouTube for how to do anything in that, and very quickly it evolved into this stream of consciousness, My Little Pony thing because I was I was doing a lot of My Little Pony fan stuff at the time. That was like what I was known
Right.
for online. So I just kind of defaulted to that. And there were already sprites for all the characters online, so I just started with those. Over time, it kind of developed into something different. I started to take the project a little more seriously. I thought I was originally going to take like a few weeks, and then I'd make something like a real game after that. But I got more invested in doing something a little more original with it. Like originally, it was very heavy. It was heavily mother influenced at first, and I think the whole basement dungeon idea was probably influenced by a combination of like the dungeon in the attic in Mother 3.
Yeah, yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah, and the whole everything with Brick Road and Earthbound. I just really liked the idea
I
of
kind of got that vibe when I played it in SLARPG. Yeah,
yeah,
that's great.
yeah, the whole vibe of here's this dungeon that isn't very good, and also the person who made it is here to talk about it with you.
Yeah,
Um, I found that really funny, and it was an easy thing to riff on, like making my first RPG. Like, oh well, the dungeon has a really bad design, but don't worry, that's the joke. Um, but oh god, the final boss originally and my earliest plans for Horse RPG was going to be a parody of Gygus, except instead it was I don't even know if you remember this, horse ebooks from Twitter back in the day.
I think I do.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It was
Wow.
it was this account that just posted, like, random phrases, like a bot account,
Yeah.
um, and I thought it would be the funniest thing in the world where instead of having all the creepy quotes that, like, Gygas says that are, like, vaguely incomprehensible and just threatening,
Yeah.
to just have a bunch of horse ebooks tweets. But I decided against this because, number 1, I think that was the year when it was revealed that Horsey Books hadn't been a real bot account in a while, and it was some guys trying to set up an ARG, and they ended it. And it was like, well, this isn't funny anymore.
Yeah.
And also, I didn't want to rely too heavily on memes and references. So I over time I shifted focus, and I introduced these original villains and all these original monsters and all these things, and it became kind of a real sincere RPG by the end, and I was pretty proud of it.
Yeah. So, do you think there was a definitive moment that convinced you to convert that fan game into SLARPG?
Yeah, that was it was kind of a confluence of a few different things. First and foremost, I do have to admit I did get a cease and desist from Hasbro
Oh,
over
really?
using My Little Pony characters. So this is something
Wow.
I haven't really talked about much in public. It's fine
Yeah.
to talk about, but I only so they sent a cease and desist through Tumblr
Wow.
like 2 or 3 weeks before the game was done. Um,
Wow.
and the only reason the game got published is because Tumblr then sent it to the email that I signed up to Tumblr for, which was not one I checked often. So if I had checked that email, Horse RPG never would have been published ever.
Wow, that's so wild. I didn't know Hasbro would do that for a fan project like that.
Yeah, it's
But
I didn't think they would. I thought I was being careful not using like any trademark logos or names. It was very obvious it was a fan thing because like there
yeah,
had been other My Little Pony fan games that were left alone, and only ones that looked more legitimate had been taken down. Like there was a pony cart game that looked like a real My Little Pony kart racer, like
yeah,
official. So that was less surprising that that got taken out. But I thought I was safe, and clearly I was not. But also I was at the time I immediately after I finished Horse RPG, I had started working on a new original game called Andromi that was going to be this like narrative adventure game with like a sci-fi setting, and I was going to make this in Unity, and I was like really ambitious with it, and then I realized that I didn't know how to use Unity, and I kind of got discouraged pretty quickly. I like this idea was just too big and too ambitious for me to just immediately jump in and make this like as soon as I opened up Unity. So I kind of struggled with this for like a year, and then the thought came to me like, well, okay, this is just for me, but what if as like a side project, I kind of preserved my first game. by making it original so that I could actually like release it publicly again. Most of the uploads had been taken down by that point by Hasbro.
Right.
It's still out there. You know, you can never truly delete something on the internet, but like none of my uploads had been up in a while, and I wanted to I since I had made original villains that had nothing to do with My Little Pony in Horse RPG, I wanted to use those in future games, but then I didn't want it to be like, well, so to understand where these characters came from, you have to hunt down this old My Little Pony RPG Maker game that got a cease and desist, and it's like you can only get it on shady uploads in random corners of the internet. Um, so I'm like, okay, so for me to use those characters again, I'll make a new version where all of My Little Pony stuff is taken out, which was honestly not that hard to do because I'd strayed so far from the source material in the first place. And I just polish it up a little and improve the story a little more, kind of lean more into the personal stuff and the sincerity that I'd tried to inject into it later on in the project, and make it like its own thing. And I figured this would just be a like easy side project for me to do while I continue to try to learn Unity and make my other game, and then it ended up taking almost 8 years. So, but yeah, but people really responded positively when I announced that I was remaking it. I thought people were going to be a little annoyed, like, oh, you're going back to your old project, and this was just going to be a thing for me. And I didn't really care if other people played it at first. Um, but the response was really positive to the new characters and the new setting and everything, so that convinced me to put more effort into it and like invest more in it as a new game. And it really, really ended up diverging from the original. Like it was supposed to just be a slight revamp to preserve my old ideas, and very quickly I was like, oh well, I wrote this all when I was 19. I can do better now. So I leaned into new ideas more.
I knew about Horse RPG a while ago, but I didn't realize it became Animal RPG until I like looked more into the development of Animal RPG, and then I
Hmm.
saw Horse RPG there, and it reminded me that that existed because I'd forgotten about it by the time I played Animal RPG, and I was like,
Yeah,
"Whoa, that's really cool!" Didn't realize it came like evolved from a fan game like that. So
yeah.
I think that's cool.
Thank you. Yeah.
Um, so, what are your favorite game mechanics in SLARPG, and how did you come up with these ideas?
I guess it would probably be the two like signature mechanics of the game is from my perspective is number one is the star power system, which is only coincidentally named the same as a thing from Thousand Year Door. I totally forgot that's what they called it in Thousand Year Door until
Oh wow, I didn't
after
even
I'd
think
already
of
done
that
it.
until you just mentioned it now. Yeah, I guess that is the
Yeah.
same.
Which is it's funny that I forgot that because I love Thousand Year Door. But anyway, so uh this was mainly influenced by I wanted to in Horse RPG, a common complaint was that the high level abilities were overpowered, where like you could just use your strongest spells right away, um, and that solved most problems pretty easily. Which is like
Yeah,
that's definitely a thing with older RPGs. Um, but in older RPGs, usually the high level abilities are like super expensive, so you can't spam them all the time. But I enjoy letting people actually use all their abilities pretty regularly. So, instead, what I wanted to do was have this system where you have to build up to use your strongest attacks and like your full
yeah.
party.
It's like a combo system almost.
Yeah, yeah. It was very much taken from MMOs like World of Warcraft and Final Fantasy 14. A lot of classes will have some kind of resource management where like these spells will build up your like spirit power gauge or whatever, and then you spend that on your more powerful abilities. And in an MMO, that's kind of a rotation usually because you're not trying to focus on like strategizing. You're trying to focus on don't stand in the AOE and like what's the boss doing, and you just kind of autopilot. But I figured that could be interesting in a turn-based RPG where there's a little more choice in what you spend it on, and it could make some like lower tier abilities a little more desirable to use because you get that bonus of building star power along with whatever the spell does by itself. Um, Originally, I wanted to have ultimate abilities that use the whole meter, but I realized that was a total pain because then you had to charge up for like 5 whole turns,
Yeah.
storing up your star power and not spending it on anything else. So instead, I limited it to like 60% of the meter, so you're only charging for like 3 turns at a time.
Yeah, that makes sense.
The other, of course, would be the spell books.
Yeah, those are really cool, I thought.
Yeah, I'm happy with those. It came from kind of an odd place actually. It was originally influenced by I don't know if you've played these in the Mega Man Battle Network games. It's kind of a card battle thing, and occasionally you'll get pre-made sets of battle chips that you can't edit what's in them, but it's just like this alternate set of abilities that you could switch to. And I thought that was kind of cool. So I thought of having like these decks of spells, and you'd have all these different spell books that have different arrangements of spells in them. And you can't edit what they do, but you can swap to this whole different set instantly. You don't have to grind to unlock all the abilities or anything. It's just you equip this thing, and then there you go. You can use all those spells that are in the thing. But over time, I played Final Fantasy V, which has a job system. That's the whole thing that you swap between jobs for all your party
Yeah.
members. And it ended up being more influenced by that, where it's kind of a subclass system, and I lean more into each spell book has its unique set of spells and like a strong theme.
Were there any games in particular that influenced your battle and game designs? You kind of talked about a few of them already, like World of Warcraft and Battle Network, but were there any other ones?
Well, definitely classic Final Fantasy. There's a lot of that. Um, but I would definitely say that after I played Dragon Quest XI, that kind of became like my guiding star for like good traditional JRPG design. Especially I'd played it around when I was really starting to like get into making the game, like getting through the story and doing all the gameplay stuff. There were a lot of parts where I was like, "Oh, how would they do this in Dragon Quest? How would they balance this? And like, how would they handle the enemy variety and the skills?" Oh, there's literally a skill that I just stole from Dragon Quest XI where Eric has the combos where like you put a negative status ailment on an enemy, and then he has those abilities that do like 8 times damage or whatever at the trade-off of removing the status ailment from the enemy. I just did that as like a thing where Claire can burn enemies with her fire abilities, and then Allison has, I think, Fan the Flames is what I called it, where it does extra damage to burned enemies. I was just like, that's such a good idea. I should do something like that.
Yeah, I thought that was cool when I found it in the game. Were there any others that you wanted to mention? Any others that might have influenced the overworld design too?
I took more from Zelda, I'd say, than like full on RPGs. I know there's always a debate over if Zelda counts as an action RPG, but
Yeah.
anyway, um,
We'll get more into that a little later.
yeah, yeah, because originally the game was supposed to have an overworld map, but I didn't think I really there weren't enough areas in the game for me to do anything particularly interesting with that, and I didn't have like an airship or plans to have like battles on the overworld or anything. So I just decided to directly connect every area, and it kind of became more Zelda-esque in that regard, and having like areas you backtrack to when you get a new ability to get like some treasure you couldn't access before, stuff like that.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense that it was inspired by Zelda. So I guess we could talk about that now. What aspects of RPGs do you believe define the genre of RPG?
Well, boy, isn't that
It's a
the
loaded
million-dollar
question.
question. Yeah, I think obviously there are multiple different styles of RPGs. I focus mainly on I prefer Japanese RPGs mostly and games designed like that as opposed to like your Bethesda games or I need to play Baldur's Gate, but I've never played a like old school hardcore computer RPGs. I'm like, oh, that's kind of scary. I don't know all those.
Yeah, I haven't tried that yet either, but I feel kind of the same way.
Mhm. I have played Mass Effect, and I like Mass Effect, and I've played a bit of Skyrim, so I'm not totally against Western RPGs. It's just my preference is usually for the classic console style. What I value in RPGs is usually just like getting to inhabit a world and explore it at your leisure and like poke around and find all these characters to talk to and like having all these enemies everywhere where you kind of get to know. I don't know what I'm trying to say here.
It's okay. It's a tough question to
It is
answer.
a tough question because like there's so much overlap these days with like action adventure games and open world games. A lot of other
Yeah,
genres have kind of cribbed from RPGs as time has
yeah.
gone on. But I guess having your character or characters that you kind of invest in and you get some amount of say in like what their abilities are or what you equip them with and having them grow over time, that's usually pretty core to it.
Yeah, I've heard people say that. I've heard some people also say that it's the stats and the numbers that make it like an RPG, but it's tough to really define it. So I like to ask each person I talk to about what they think it means. In the RPGs that ask you to input a name for the protagonist and sometimes create the protagonist, do you tend to use a specific name or create a specific character, or does it change from game to game?
Yeah, it kind of depends on the game for me. I find I usually just try to recreate a character of mine. Um, like there's a lot of games where I've made like Melody or Allison or someone as the character. I did like I was playing I think Etrian Odyssey 5 at one point in SLARPG's development, and I just made the SLARPG party as my party in that. Um, but if I can't do that, I might just try to make something that like feels like it fits with the world. Just something that I kind of vibe with. It's like, oh, this would be a fun character to play in this world. Although if it's just a choice of name, I'm usually very boring and I just go with the default name.
Do you prefer playing as protagonists who have a defined personality or protagonists who are more like an avatar for the player? Or does it depend on the game's story that uses them that influences your preference?
Yeah, so this is kind of an odd one for me because I think if you asked me, I would say I really like playing as a predefined character with a personality and like their own storyline, which is what I did in SLARPG. Like
Yeah,
there's definitely a lot of obvious mother influence in SLARPG, but I'd say it is closer to something like Final Fantasy and Execution because it's so much about a main character's story and like
yeah,
she talks and has dialogue and has her own conflicts closer to like Cloud or something
right.
compared to like your Dragon Quest hero. But then like I look at my actual favorite RPGs and I realize that most of them do have silent protagonists or at least protagonists who barely talk. Like Mother and Dragon Quest 11 and Undertale and Deltarune and the Mario RPGs, like all of these have not like blank slate protagonists per se, but very very quiet ones that are usually trying to be a player avatar. Although obviously Toby's games are riffing on that in a very meta way,
Yeah,
but
right.
like you aren't getting a lot of dialogue from Chris throughout Deltarune.
Yeah, but for that game, at least at the beginning of what we know now, and for all those other games you mentioned, they're like more like an
Yeah.
avatar for the player. Yeah, yeah,
So I guess it really does just it depends on the execution. I think I enjoy characters in games and if that characterization is going to characters around the player character, not so much the player character, I'm usually fine with that.
So, do you have a favorite character archetype or job role in the RPGs you play?
Oh yeah. Well, I definitely like healers, which is why I made a game where the main character is a healer.
That makes sense. The healer's kind of integral to all the RPG parties, I think. can't really have an RPG without somebody that heals, or it would just be items.
Yeah, I mean, I enjoy playing healers in MMOs, but then it's such a big responsibility, and I'm not a particularly hardcore MMO player. So, but I also like just casters in general. I think I like characters who rely heavily on magic. Though going the complete opposite direction, I do also enjoy characters who like don't use magic at all. I always like the like unarmed fighter who just goes in completely no weapon at all, and that is how they do the most damage, like the monk in Final Fantasy
Yeah.
One, where you just never have to buy a weapon for it. Or dual wielding is always fun, which is why I put a dual wield charm in SLARPG so that you can have Allison have two swords and do a billion damage every turn.
This is kind of going more into the story of the games you enjoy now. How much do you value the relationship between game mechanics and story?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's one of the main things that draws me to RPGs, I think, is how closely related those are.
Right.
Particularly like classic turn-based RPGs. There's so much you can do with that heavily abstracted battle system that as a storytelling tool, because you don't have to worry about making everything a mechanic or like having it work in like a real-time, fully animated combat thing. Like you can just do things with stats and like descriptions of things that happen that are very characterful. Like I always think back to the flashback segment in Final Fantasy VII where Sephiroth hasn't turned evil yet, and he's in your party with you, and just
Yeah.
seeing his super high stats and like the crazy amount of damage he can do, it like sells you on the idea of how powerful he is just with like raw numbers.
Yeah, that is a really interesting thing you could do. You could really show through the stats the character's growth, I guess. And if they have really high stats, they've grown a lot, it seems like, or they're at a really far place in their story, like Sephiroth.
Going back to Mother, like the classic example of the training segment with Pooh when you first get him, where it's just pure narration of like all of his senses being removed and everything in the battle system, but because you can't see your character in that first person battle screen, it's just like it sells it on this surreal moment just
Right.
purely through the text.
Yeah, it's special how you can do that kind of stuff in RPGs. Which events in your own life and stories in media do you think influence the story that you're telling in SLARPG?
So it's definitely there's an element of some of it is autobiographical a little bit. Obviously, it is a fantasy adventure,
Right.
but there's elements of my real life in there.
Yeah.
It's evoking those feelings I had in my early 20s of setting out on a new venture and like kind of making some rash decisions in life and just kind of jumping in and be like, well, this will just everything will work out probably. People say that a lot of art is about the making of itself and like what the creator was going through at the time, and that's very true of SLARPG. The whole like inciting incident of the story of like Melly and Allison decide on a whim to join this adventurers guild, and Allison quits her job and everything is um, like a thinly veiled allusion to my own life. We're like, okay, I'm gonna start making video games, and like my boyfriend Anthony, who also worked on the game, he did a lot of the NPC designs and some of the bosses and stuff. But we had been dating like a year, and he's like, all right, well, I'm just gonna quit my job over here, and I'm gonna move across the country and live with you. And he was just gonna find a new job over here, and then that ended up being harder than we realized. You know, for a little bit, he wanted to do like workshop items for Dota 2 because we have friends who do that professionally, and that ended up being a very, very difficult thing to break into if you were not already into it. So it's like this whole thing. And, you know, I was struggling with this feeling that I kind of jumped the gun, like, oh, I don't know if this is really all that viable in my own art career. like immediately going into, all right, well, I made an RPG Maker game that people kind of liked, and so now this is my job. And I dropped out of college, and I was only going to community college, so I wasn't really getting that much out of it anyway. But it did work out in the end for me. So SLARPG has a happy ending instead of being a harsh reality check, although that does happen along the way. There's a lot of like jumping into an art career, or just any sort of like chasing your dream,
Yeah.
that feeling of being in your early 20s. It's like, I can do anything. I'm going to go do this and it'll work out. And then life happens. And of course, there's a lot of stuff with like the relationship stuff is drawing from my own experiences to an extent. There's a few lines of dialogue with like Melly and Allison that are like almost taken word for word from my own life. Just a lot of stuff like that. I was definitely the game originally didn't have as much like grounded, relatable story stuff in it like that, but I played Night in the Woods.
Oh, I love that game.
Yeah, I played that fairly early in development, and I was like, oh, it's really awesome to have this game just about a bunch of messy 20-year-olds
Yeah,
who like don't know what they're doing in their life and just focusing on those grounded elements of it. And I'm like, that really inspired me to push it further in that direction.
that makes a lot of sense. Yeah. Were there any other stories in media that influenced it, maybe outside of games too?
Oh, for sure. I mean, it's broadly influenced by just, fantasy adventure, hero's journey type stories. I really wanted to have one of those with a trans protagonist because I had literally
Yeah.
never seen that ever in my life. We're at the time when I started making SLARPG, there was definitely I was starting to see more queer stories
Yeah.
in fiction, but it felt like the like genre fiction adventure stuff wasn't we weren't seeing as much of that yet. So just seeing like this story about a trans protagonist coming into her own and banding together with her friends and saving the world felt like something that I really wanted to see. I'd definitely say Adventure Time was a big influence on the world building, where you can just throw in whatever you want and you can think of an excuse for it. Like, oh yeah, here's this fantasy stuff and here's this sci-fi stuff and here's this weird stuff that isn't really anything. And just, if it's fun, you can just throw it in there. It's fine.
Yeah, that's great to hear then. Yeah. It's so cool to like see a game that has such representation like this game has. I really appreciate that. Thank you. So, what advice would you give to anyone out there who's thinking of making their own RPG?
Number one, don't make the mistake I did. Don't make a game in RPG Maker VX Ace. You're probably not going to if you're starting a game now. Just don't do it. It doesn't work on Mac.
Oh wow,
It
I didn't know it didn't
it
work on Mac either.
No, that's been a huge headache for me. It's the last 32-bit version of RPG Maker. So when they did the big Catalina update for Mac that made all 32-bit apps stop working,
Oh
is
no.
just you can't port it anymore. You could like go through this process to port it before, but you can't anymore. And it barely works on Steam Deck. It kind of runs, but there's like some hiccups with it. Um, so definitely use a newer version of the engine if that's what you're looking to do. Um, but also, I'd say just try to start small. Like it's really easy to come up with this massive design document and like a huge story outline of everything you want to do, and then you start working on the game, and it's just like a brick wall. Like you realize how difficult it is to make, like, you don't even know where to start. You don't know how to capture that perfect vision you have in your head
Yeah.
as a beginner. So like I think it's better to just start learning the tools and kind of see what you can do with your current skill set, and kind of get a feel for things and see where the process takes you.
Yeah, it doesn't have to be a huge thing right off the bat.
No, no. You do not have to make a 40-hour epic right away. And I'd just say there are a wide variety of RPGs out there. And I think it's good to have a broad perspective on what can be done with the genre. It's easy to just have your one favorite game and want to do it like that, and there's nothing wrong with that. But you never know what's out there and like what can be done with the genre if you don't try out a good variety of them. And it's just good to have a variety of influences.
Yeah, there's, especially nowadays when there are so many indies out there with access to the internet, you can really play a lot of varied stuff now. It doesn't just have to be like AAA stuff, and it's great.
Yeah, there's a ton of indie stuff. Yeah.
Thanks so much for talking to me about all of this. Is there anything
Yeah.
else you'd like to say to close it out, and anything else that you're working on next that you'd like people to look out for?
I think I generally covered all my bases. I am in the early planning phases of a new game that is not related to SLARPG, but people will probably enjoy if they liked that, but that's a long ways away right now.
Awesome.
There's going to be a hard mode update at some point for
Cool.
SLARPG. I'll get that done. I started working on that because people think the game is a little easy, and that is true. It is a little easy, so I'm making a harder mode. That will also have some little small additions here and there, just little fun things to find if you already played the game, minor, like, oh, here's like a new NPC or something. So that will be fun to look forward to.
Thanks again to Bobby Schroeder for joining me to talk about Super Lesbian Animal RPG. The game is available now on Steam and itch.io for Windows. Thanks for listening. I'm Kody, and this has been RPG Potential.